All right, hello, welcome to lesson 3.01, War in Vietnam. This lesson covers pages 832 to 837 in what is clearly everybody's favorite book of all time, the American Odyssey, our textbook. And our goals for today, we want to summarize the situation in Vietnam before the United States got involved, explain why U.S. involvement in Vietnam escalated, and lastly, we want to be able to identify a couple of different people such as Ho Chi Minh, Ngo Dinh Diem, and key American leaders of the war in Vietnam. So a big important lesson. So to kind of bring everything into context, we just finished Unit 2, right? Unit 2 covered mostly, we talked about the civil rights movement and other movements within the United States for other minority groups to push for equal rights. The backset to all of that was we're still in the Cold War, right? We talked to Unit 1 all about the Cold War, right? So that's still going on. We're still in that era of containment policy. So a lot of what we're going to talk about in this unit is going to kind of bring us back into this Cold War era and kind of our foreign policy and kind of where that all takes us. And obviously, it's going to take us to Vietnam. So we're going to talk about that today. So there is some debate about exactly when the United States became involved in Vietnam. And Vietnam has a long history of being under the control or colonized by other countries. So Vietnam was once under the control of China. This is for number 2 on your reading guide. We'll go back to number 1, don't worry. And don't forget, if you haven't already, pause this video and download your reading guide out of the 3.01 checklist also. So yeah, Vietnam once was a colony of China, and then became a French colony. And then Japan took control of that during World War II. So you can see all this back and forth going on. After the war, after World War II, it came back under French control. But there was an independence movement that took place within Vietnam that brought communism into the picture and actually divided Vietnam. So if you think similarly to Korea, when we talked about the Korean War, you had North Korea that was communist, a South Korea that was capitalist and democratic, and that was the war, that kind of civil war. And a really similar situation is going to play out here in Vietnam, where you're going to have a communist North Vietnam and a democratic and capitalist South Vietnam. So at this point, the United States became involved. Eventually, over the course of U.S. involvement in Vietnam, it's going to involve 6 different U.S. presidents, hundreds of thousands of American troops, and untold Vietnamese soldiers and civilians would become involved in what at the time was the longest conflict in U.S. history. U.S. involvement in Iraq is eventually going to turn into a longer period of time than Vietnam, but still a very long time. So back to number 1, fill in the blanks here. Eisenhower warned that if one of the nations of Southeast Asia fell to communist rule, the rest of the nations would follow, like a row of dominoes being knocked down. This becomes known as the domino theory. And it's the domino theory, very similar to the idea of containment, just that, we can't let Vietnam turn communist, because if we do, then Laos is going to become communist, then Cambodia, then Thailand, then Burma, and so on and so forth, right? So the idea is if we let this one nation fall to communism, all these other ones are going to join soon after. This guy here, pictured for number 3, his name is Ho Chi Minh. He was a communist who led the Vietnamese nationalists against French occupation and later became the dictator of North Vietnam. I don't know if I can move the camera so you can write that down. Oh, that didn't help. Here we go. I'll put myself up here. Sorry about that. So yeah, all right, and then number 4 here, the United States supported the South Vietnamese leader only because he was against communism, and that guy's name, that's this guy here, Ngo Dinh Diem. So I've talked about this before, but the United States had this kind of history during the Cold War of supporting some pretty brutal dictators as long as they weren't communists. So it was like it didn't really matter how terrible of a person they were and how terribly they treated their people. If they weren't communists, we were cool with them. And that was the case here with Ngo Dinh Diem, who was the leader of South Vietnam. So as you can imagine, the United States favoring Ngo Dinh Diem didn't gain us a lot of support amongst the South Vietnamese people that were under this, brutal dictatorship of Ngo Dinh Diem. All right, so early on in Vietnam, we start with President Eisenhower, and the United States supplies aid to South Vietnam. This is before we send in troops or anything like that, right? So our very first involvement is going to be listed here. So under President Eisenhower, we send military advisors there to train the South Vietnamese army. So we send a small amount of military personnel, U.S. military personnel in, with the idea of helping the South Vietnamese build their army, train their army, so that they can fight off the communist North. Then under President Kennedy, initially sends 16,000 additional military advisors to train and organize the South Vietnamese army. Now, I kind of laughed when I said military advisors because, as you know, 16,000, you're not going to have 16,000 military advisors, right? You're basically starting to send troops in. And these troops are going to start helping the South Vietnamese army fight as opposed to just training them. And then also President Kennedy sent helicopters and American pilots to help South Vietnam fight the Viet Cong. So this now, at this point of U.S. involvement, we're starting to fly missions, right? Scouting and so providing air support to the cause. All right, as I mentioned, Ngo Dinh Diem, although supported by the United States because he was anti-communist, was a brutal and repressive leader. He rigged elections, he jailed his opponents, and he was very unpopular amongst the Buddhist majority in Vietnam, in South Vietnam, and that was largely because he was a Catholic. This here is a famous picture of a Buddhist monk who was protesting Diem's rule by committing the act of self-immolation. Self-immolation is exactly what you see happening in this picture. This guy literally set himself on fire and died in protest of this guy's rule. That's a pretty big and bold statement, to say the least. So after images such as this here, were seen by the American public, President Kennedy could no longer justify supporting Diem's regime. So a group of South Vietnamese army officers staged a coup d'etat to remove Diem from power. So not only was Diem removed, but he was also murdered. So Diem's out. He's dead. And that was supported by the United States. For number 6 here, President Kennedy and his military advisors authorized this coup. So they basically said, okay, enough's enough. Do what you have to do. Take him out. And that's what happened. You're going to hear some terminology about the Vietnam War, and one is the VC, or the Viet Cong. In 1957, the Viet Cong, again called the VC by Americans, they were guerrilla fighters that wanted Diem out of South Vietnam. So not only is this war going to be fought against the North, against North Vietnamese soldiers, but also against the Viet Cong. These, again, guerrilla fighters. These could be South Vietnamese people, citizens, whatever. These were guerrilla fighters. And that's going to play a part in this war that makes it a very difficult war to wage, because it's going to be very hard once the U.S. gets fully involved to tell the difference between who's just a South Vietnamese citizen and who is the Viet Cong. Okay, so Ho Chi Minh will use the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which is this network of paths used by North Vietnam to transport supplies to the Viet Cong in South Vietnam. So yeah, the Viet Cong is going to be supplied and supported by Ho Chi Minh and the North Vietnamese. So again, Kennedy is going to kind of be initially involved in the beginning stages of this conflict. So Kennedy is going to make several public statements, have press conferences, and he calls Vietnam the cornerstone of the free world. He's making that argument that the reason that we need to get involved in Vietnam is because democracy, capitalism is on the line. If we don't do something to stop communism from taking hold here, who knows what's going to happen. So he's basically following that domino theory that Eisenhower kind of started, right? That, you know, if we let this Vietnam domino fall, it's going to knock down all these other dominoes. And we can't have that happen. So again, JFK sends those 16,000 military advisors to help the South Vietnamese government. The VC, the Viet Cong, gained support in South Vietnam, and then the leader, once the United States starts getting more involved, the U.S. leader that is put in charge of Vietnam, of all the troops there, basically in charge of the war on the ground in Vietnam, is going to be a guy by the name of General William Westmoreland. So again, he becomes the overall commander in charge of Vietnam. As we know, we've talked about it before, Kennedy's assassinated. And his vice president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, becomes president. Under Johnson's watch, under Johnson's presidency, is when the Vietnam War is really going to ramp up as far as U.S. involvement. So before he's involved, right, we've got 16,000 military advisors over there. We're flying helicopter and airplane missions. We're pretty well involved, but that's going to escalate much, much, much more under President Johnson. So yeah, LBJ is going to escalate this war, meaning he increases the United States involvement in the war. The Secretary of Defense, who was appointed under President Kennedy, stayed on under President Johnson. This guy by the name of Robert McNamara. Robert McNamara recommends sending more U.S. troops into Vietnam. And this all becomes possible when this thing happens in the Gulf of Tonkin. And I'll talk a lot more about the Gulf of Tonkin incident shortly. But this event happens in the Gulf of Tonkin, which is right off the coast of Vietnam, in the water beside Vietnam, right? Which ultimately Congress is going to give Johnson everything he needs to wage war in Vietnam. So, important thing to note, under the Constitution, the president can't declare war. the president is the commander in chief, and then he, once or she, once war is declared, is able to carry out the war and make all the key decisions. But Congress is the only body that can declare war. What Congress is going to do is they're going to issue this resolution called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. And that ultimately is their way of saying, you know what, we're not going to declare war, but we're going to kind of wipe our hands clean of Vietnam, and we're just going to push all that responsibility onto President Johnson. He can do whatever he wants. He can wage war. We're just not going to call it a war, but we're going to allow him to do whatever he wants there. And so because of that, Johnson then is going to send more and more and more and more troops into Vietnam. First, Operation Rolling Thunder is an intense bombing of North Vietnam. The main target is to disable that Ho Chi Minh Trail I mentioned. And in 1965, we get 184,000 U.S. troops in Vietnam. So that's a lot more than 16,000, right? So you can see that ramp up of this war. So this is just kind of a little exercise to make sure we know who's who here for number 7. I'm just going to go through these quickly. Ho Chi Minh, there, we'll go right down the line. Ho Chi Minh is D, the leader of Communist North Vietnam. That's him here. Ngo Dinh Diem is E. That's him here. He was the leader of South Vietnam before he was removed by a coup d'etat. Robert McNamara, that's Robert McNamara here on the phone. That he is C. He was the Secretary of Defense under Kennedy and Johnson. The Viet Cong, A, those were communist guerrilla fighters. And then William Westmoreland, B, here's William Westmoreland here. He was the commander of American forces in Vietnam. So it's important to remember who these individuals were. It might pop up on a question. Okay, so 2 events prompted Johnson to escalate the war, and I said I would talk more about this Gulf of Tonkin incident. For number 8 here, you can fill in the blanks. So Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, again this guy on the phone, reported that the new South Vietnamese government was weak and that the Viet Cong controlled about 40% of the countryside. So that's bad news for the United States if we want to support the South Vietnamese, right? We don't want them turning communists, but if the Viet Cong is controlling almost half of the country, then that doesn't look good, right? And he feared that South Vietnam would fall to the communists without an increase in U.S. aid. So American naval vessels operating in the Gulf of Tonkin, so this area here is the Gulf of Tonkin, they reported that they were being attacked by torpedoes being shot at them by North Vietnamese patrol boats. President Johnson then asked Congress to pass what becomes known as the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which would empower the president to send troops to Vietnam without a formal declaration of war. So again, Congress was like, cool, we're going to wipe our hands clean of this. We're not going to actually officially have to declare war. Now we're going to give Johnson all that responsibility. The problem is that not everything that we thought happened in the Gulf of Tonkin actually happened. More on that in a minute. Stay tuned. All right, so once we fully immerse and escalate this war, and we have those 184,000, and that number's going to just continue to go up over time. U.S. troops in Vietnam. General William Westmoreland is going to have this strategy on how to carry out this war. So this is number 9 here. First, there's a search and destroy strategy. This is the ground war in South Vietnam. This is, boots on the ground. How did the North Vietnamese respond? The Viet Cong used hit and run tactics and avoided a lot of head-on fighting that Westmoreland had planned for. So that's going to make this war very difficult for U.S. soldiers because they had been trained to fight a more head-on war, a more traditional style of war. And that's not what's going to be happening. This is going to be more of a guerrilla style warfare. Again, hit and run tactics. Small little bombings over here, little bombings over there. Try to catch the troops off guard. Things like that are going on. And then there's Operation Rolling Thunder. This was an air campaign against North Vietnam, where North Vietnam mobilized the entire population to quickly make repairs to damage caused by bombing. That was the North Vietnamese response, sorry. So this becomes, for North Vietnam, and this becomes a total war. And we've talked about total war when we talked about World War I and World War II. For the United States, this isn't a total war. We're just sending hundreds of thousands of troops there, but we're not growing victory gardens like we did in World War II. We're not back on the home front. We're not rationing things. We're not even though we're sending hundreds of thousands of troops, we're not sending 4 million troops, right? So this is a much different type of war than a total war for the United States. But for the North Vietnamese, everybody's all in. And that's going to play a big part in how this war carries on as well. Okay, this is the end of the reading guide for lesson 3.01. There is, I'm making a second video to talk even more about the Gulf of Tonkin incident. I will post that so that you can watch it also. I just want to keep them two separate videos. The idea being that the 3.02 lesson is more or less not really a lesson and more or less an assignment. So for lesson 3.02, I want you to watch the video that's going to come after this about me explaining the Gulf of Tonkin incident. I'm going to go a little bit more in depth into it. And then your assignment, which is posted in the course, you are going to watch another video that's not made by me, and you're going to have some questions to answer as you watch that video. All of the questions are explained in that video, so you just have to follow along. They're all in order. It's like maybe a 13-minute video. It's not super long. So make sure you do that. That will be due at the end of the week, but do that whenever you get the chance. So you'll want to take the 3.01 checkpoint, watch the Gulf of Tonkin video that I make. That's going to come right after this, and then watch and complete the Gulf of Tonkin video for the 3.02 assignment. All right. Thanks for watching.